Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Holly Liu. I was co-founder of Kabam, a mobile gaming company. I was also GHC 2018 Abby Award winner. And previously, I was at Y Combinator as visiting partner, and now I'm at Mozilla Builders as investor and mentor. While we were there, I've spent a ton of time talking about and thinking about how to evaluate startup ideas. And that's what I want to talk about with you all today. Before talking about evaluating startup ideas, we should talk a little bit about what is a startup and what are its characteristics. Well, the first thing about startups is that they're scalable. What we mean by scalable is you do one small thing and you can impact a ton of people. An example of this is Facebook. If you are an engineer at Facebook and you write one line of code, you can impact almost 2 billion people once that code is released, all at once with just one tiny line of code. The second thing about startups is they grow incredibly fast, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. The third thing is large companies can be built on a small amount of capital. You can see this through the WhatsApp messaging company, right? This company grew to a large amount of people with very little capital. And finally, tech is usually the bedrock of this. This is why I'm so excited to talk about this with all of you. Many of you at GHC are technologists, so many of you can build tech startups. Because as Mark Andreessen, inventor of Netscape internet browser, said, software is eating the world. Before we jump into how to evaluate startup ideas, we talk a lot about what is a startup. At YC, we spend a lot of time saying, make something that people want. That is a startup. What I like to say is make something a lot of people want. To me, that is a tech startup. So what do we mean by this? If you look at the word something and the word want, and you look at it a little bit closer, you'll see that there is a problem and a solution. If people want it, that means you've solved some type of problem. And the solution is that something, you make something. For those of you who are builders and makers, you can build any of these types of solutions, but just make sure you're building it for a problem. And that's the most important thing about evaluating startup ideas, is that you're solving some sort of problems. Oftentimes when we look at problem and solution, we think that we might own the problem as the founder, and we also own the solution. But reality is it's the customer or the user that has the problem, and you as the entrepreneur and the founder are supposed to find that problem and create a solution for them that fixes their problem. So when finding problems, some of the things that we like to say is talk to users. But what I like to say is don't talk to users, listen to users. The second thing in finding problems is you should ask questions from your users. But ask the questions about the past. Oftentimes what will happen is that we will say, hey, do you like a grocery shopping list? That's what our app does. And we like to make grocery shopping lists much better. And oftentimes people will say, oh yeah, sure, because oftentimes people want to be nice, particularly your friends and family who you start talking with. But really what would be more interesting in terms of problem finding and finding good problems to solve is that you would ask them, so when was the last time you went shopping? Can you walk me through what you did? Had you come up with a list? Do you come up with a list? Or is it several people? What's happening there? So oftentimes when that happens, you can find out that sometimes the problem you think you're solving about a shopping list may not actually be the problem. Maybe you realize that the problem is they have no time to even make a meal plan. And really the problem you want to solve is just to take that off of their minds and you create more of a meal planning company. So it's very important to ask questions about what they currently do or about their past, the last time that they had this problem. The third thing is oftentimes when we're telling people to talk about their company, we say show, don't tell. Well, oftentimes with users, it is more important to also ask them to show you and not to tell you. And once they show you, you want to watch what they do. One time when we were doing a user study, we were able to dial into a user's computer with their permission, of course. And it was really eye-opening to see what had happened. We asked them to navigate to the last TV show that they discovered. How did they discover it? How did they enjoy watching it? How do they watch it? And it was really fascinating. We found out that the way they browsed the internet was very different than what we assumed. They browsed with bookmarks open. That was not something we've encountered. They also did their searches through the browser bar, which was something very different. And oftentimes now everybody does their searches through the browser bar. You could tell because when you and I both do it, it comes up with search terms. So it was very interesting watching them. We never would have discovered those things had we not watched them. So in finding good problems to solve will lead to great startup ideas and being able to evaluate them. But when you do find these problems, make sure you're not talking to users, but you're listening to users. Ask them about their past, the last time they actually did something, or their current behavior, and get them to show you. And when you get them to show you what they've done, watch what they do. Because the solutions must come from the problem, or else no one wants this. Oftentimes this happens so many times where we make solutions and we're wondering why people aren't using them. They must come from a problem. And when you're stuck, it may be because people may not have this problem, or it's hard to find people with this problem. For example, this one time I was talking to a founder who said, people who would like our product are people who like to stay organized. And I told him, maybe it might be a little difficult to find out where those people are and tell them about your product. So sometimes that might be difficult. And finally, this is probably most likely the reason why you're stuck is likely nobody wants your solution. So since it's so important for startup ideas to be solving a problem, I thought it might make sense to talk a little bit about what good problems to solve are. The first one is good problems to solve are urgent. Oftentimes we call it a hair on fire problem, and we talk about a vitamin versus a pill. But what I like to say is a bandage versus a pill. Oftentimes we stick a Band-Aid and it helps a little bit, but it doesn't really kill the pain. Usually a pill or a painkiller actually kills the pain. So a good problem tends to be something that is just incredibly urgent and they need it right away and they need a painkiller. And hopefully your startup idea is actually that painkiller. Good problems to solve are valuable. That means people are willing to spend their time or their money. They continue to come back to your site over and over. And when they do, they spend a good amount of time engaging on it. Or the other thing is they pay money. Oftentimes they'll pay money over and over again because they really love your product or your service. And thirdly, good problems to solve are frequent. It doesn't happen just once, it happens many times over. Oftentimes you'll think about selling houses may only happen once in your life or twice. Buying a car may not be as frequent. And oftentimes you might think this isn't a good enough problem. However, when you think about across several people or the population of the United States, you find that the fourth characteristic of the problem is that it's common. That even though it might happen only once or twice in somebody's life, it will happen to everybody. So that's what you want. You want this problem to happen for a lot of people, not just one person. An example of this was I had a relative when he was younger had been infected with botulism, a very, very rare case of it. And it was so rare, there was only about 50 cases of antidote that was made a year, very small. Now that company is an amazing company to provide a life-saving antidote for this rare, not just disease, but rare occurrence of this sickness. And we were able to get it, and thankfully he's okay. But the thing is that company probably wasn't a tech startup company, because reality is the number of cases was just too small. So there wasn't as many people who would pay that much amount of money to get it. And finally, good problems to solve are not already solved, right? You could see this in perfect examples such as toilet paper. A toilet paper is incredibly urgent. It's valuable. People spend time and money on this, either searching for it or making sure they have enough of it. It is frequent. It happens several times. And it's common. Many people need it. However, does changing the color really solve the problem? Not really. It's already been solved by normal toilet paper. Now take, for example, Stitch Fix. Stitch Fix is started by a founder named Katrina Lake. It's what we call a subscription service to clothes. Basically, you just enter a style quiz, and once a quarter or every month, these stylish clothes in your sizes comes to you like magic. And what we found was that among my friends that used it was solving actually quite an urgent problem. Most of my friends were either busy executives, were doctors or lawyers, and honestly, they just didn't have time to look the way they needed to look for their profession. They didn't have any time to go shopping. It was very valuable. People were willing to pay that $25 styling fee. And it was frequent. And we need to buy clothes several times a year, not just once a year. We have different occasions, different reasons why we need them. And it was common. Several people, many women needed this. It's so common that when she went IPO, she was a multi-billion-dollar company. And this wasn't already solved yet. The problem was that if we needed to buy clothes and we were busy, we would either have to go online, try to pick out the clothes. Some of us aren't gifted with the styling gene and be able to look incredibly stylish. Then we would have to try them on and see how great they looked. And if it didn't look that great, we'd have to send them home or send it back to the supplier. Or we'd have to spend our time going through department stores, trying to pick out the right sizes, going back and forth. And this problem of saving time and shopping and looking stylish just wasn't already solved. So the good problems to solve are urgent, valuable, frequent, common, and not already solved. So in making something that a lot of people want, oftentimes as a founder and even investor, we spend a lot of times wondering, what does that mean? Because at the end of everything, we're really looking for is love. Do people love our products? Do people love our service? Do people love our solution? Right? So oftentimes we need to understand, what does it mean? How do I know that people love our product and our service that we are building? Oftentimes I'll talk to founders and they'll say, oh, people love us. And I'll say, how do you know people love you? Is it that they're coming back every day? Is it that they are spending a lot of time on your app when they do come back? Are they spending a lot of money frequently? Because these are all signs of love, that people love what you have built. So the two things in knowing whether or not your startup idea is good is growth rate and market size, or potential number of customers. Sometimes if you've already launched, you can start measuring these things right away. The two things you need to know about growth rate is, what are you measuring and what should be the pace of growth? The two things you should either be measuring, it's usually one or the other, is time or money. If people love your product, they're usually engaging in your product and they're coming back to your product either week after week or day after day. And it's usually measured in weekly active users. Or people come back and pay you money, and they'll pay you money such as in Stitch Fix, every month, every quarter for this service. For the most part, many of you are probably going to have revenue as the main thing you're measuring. But for those that are building community or social media apps, they tend to be measured in weekly active users. There is a third type of startup that some of you might be building, which is in GovTech or healthcare. And many of those startups are measured in milestones because it's so incredibly regulated. However, for our intents and purposes, we'll focus on the growth rate of either time or money. Usually the pace that we throw out there is 10% week over week is exceptional. 7% week over week growth is great. And 5% week over week growth is really good. So what's so important about this growth rate? Take a look at this graph. Can you guess what this is? If you've guessed the total cases of COVID in the UK, you've guessed correctly. What you notice about growth rate is it starts out and it feels very slow. It feels like nothing's happening. And you just keep plugging along, and even though the growth rate's very good, you don't feel like the numbers stack. But then looking back, you realize you've hit exponential growth. Can anybody guess whose revenue chart this is? This is Airbnb's revenue chart. They were famously growing at a 7% week over week in bookings while they were in YC, and it probably didn't feel like much. 8.4 million sounds like a lot of revenue when you're first starting out, and it is a lot, but they kept on their growth. They kept growing. And in 2018, they were at $3.6 billion. So you can see the impact of that growth rate. It's exponential. The second thing that you as a founder, particularly a founder of a tech startup, wants to know is what the market size is. And sometimes investors will also ask this because they're looking for opportunities that are billions of dollars, as those type of opportunities are able to grow at a certain pace and able to make impact at such a large scale. It's better to see this by doing a formula. Oftentimes we look at market size by multiplying the number of customers by the amount they pay annually. And together you get the total addressable market. So when we look at number of customers, it's number of potential customers that would buy your product. So you put in the price of what you're charging your product for. And usually investors like to see a total addressable market of larger than $1 billion. So how do I know that a startup idea is good? Solving a good problem that has never been solved before is incredibly important. Then you want to show the growth rate on either time or money. And then you want to show that the market size or potential customers are huge. And we talked about just how huge should that be. Because if you get a really good startup idea, what you realize is that the journey to a good startup idea starts with just one user. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to your questions in the chat. Thank you. Bye.